thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is the first Ask Us Anything we've done, but we're really excited to do this because we get asked a lot of common questions, and we thought that this would be a great place to invite our community, invite the public in to ask us anything and to have a conversation about neurodiversity. So as Danielle mentioned, for anyone just hopping in, please feel free to type any questions that you might have in the chat. You can also direct message Danielle if you want to ask a private anonymous question to her. She'll be moderating all of the questions that we get. So some people submitted questions in advance, so that's what we have prepared answers for. And otherwise, we'll have time to answer your questions as well. And I see that we have 4 of our team members here. So it's myself, Danielle, Melody, and Paige. And so we're all going to be here to answer your questions. So thank you for being here. Just a really quick introduction. Yes, Danielle and I will be moderating today's conversation. We are from Neurotalent Works. We're a nonprofit that is partnering with companies to advance a diversity of minds in the workplace and to connect employers to a neurodiverse talent pool. So what do we do at a very high level? We start with businesses. We really look for employers who want to invest in neurodiversity inclusion. We do consulting, we build roadmaps with companies, and ultimately we want to help identify jobs, teams, managers who might want to meet and be open to interviewing a neurodiverse talent pool. We also do talent readiness, which is the program Danielle leads. Then this is meeting one-on-one with all of the job candidates that come to us that are neurodivergent. And her and Paige, also on the team, do training and have neurodivergent networking and community conversations to really empower our neurodiverse community to self-advocate, to know how their mind works, and to get the supports that they need to be successful in the workplace. And then ultimately, we want to connect both. We want to connect job candidates to our employers, and we want to support and coach our managers and neurodivergent professionals in the workplace to be optimized to do their best work. And that's what Melody from our team does and leads for us. So a really quick legal disclaimer, mostly because we got several questions about workplace accommodations. And so we just put this in here that we are not lawyers. And so the opinions expressed are, opinions of our team, but do not necessarily represent fully what employment lawyers might promote and seek. So we always say to go to your legal counsel for anything that's related to accommodations, just to make sure that you are following the right processes. So I'll hand back to Danielle.
Thank you. So, we often get asked the appropriate language to use. So we like to kind of provide this example to ground us for this event and to just start that acceptance of differently wired minds. So, we have neurodiversity here, which Jessica explained is the diversity of minds in the workplace. Our hope is to promote acceptance, belonging, and inclusion for neurodiversity. And then we have neurodivergent. So this is an individual with a neurological or cognitive difference, which often lends to a different style of learning, communication, or even living styles. And we recognize as well that every neurodivergent individual will have a different lived experience. So this event won't necessarily reflect all of the lived experiences of neurodivergent individuals, but from working with the community and for the community, we want to answer these questions in the best way that we feel will continue to promote acceptance and hopefully help individuals here today. There's also different perspectives on neurodivergence. Some view neurodivergence as our minds really just being differently wired, while others do view it as having a disability. So we really use language that reflects both. So you'll probably hear that today as well. So just starting with a little demonstration here, a challenge, if you will. So we have 2 images here, and please, feel free to put in the chat or come off audio. We'd love to hear about some of the differences that we might see before these two, about these two images of sushi? Missing black things. Yes, Melody, one of the California rolls, in the, I guess, bottom right corner is missing some sesame seeds or black things. Less sashimi on the plate on the left. Yes, they added a tuna sashimi there. You're spotting some differences. I love it. Keep going.
You're missing a piece of sushi on the bottom right.
That's right. Yep.
Mm.
The center there. Lower right has green on the left, yellow on the right. Yes, so you can see on the lower right quadrant that, yes, thank you, Jessica, that pizza sushi, it looks like there's a color change, a possible item change, avocado to mango, maybe. By the way, there's 9 differences. So I think we've got 4 so far.
You're missing in the upper right photo, there's a piece of, it's not sushi, it's whatever, sushima, on the right there. Yep.
Yep, that's 6. I also see someone in the chat put less carrots on the right side. That's a good spot. There are less carrots in that little salad. 2 left.
Y'all are doing great.
I know.
Several detail-oriented folks on this call.
Absolutely. Suzanne, the salmon piece on the top has fewer fat lines. Yes. Yep. There it is. We have 1 left. No one's gotten that one. Great.
Yeah, this one's hard.
This last one, no one has gotten. Yes, it's very difficult. I hardly see it. I'll give it maybe another 10 seconds.
In the slaw on the left-hand side, there's more like orangey color than on the right-hand side.
Yeah, we got that one. Less
Oh, you
carrot.
did. Okay, I missed
Yep.
that one. Oh, that's carrots. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. The green color is off on the sushi. Oh, no, wait. On the sushi on the right. Yes, we got that. We got that one.
Oh.
Fewer spots on the plate.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? There was actually one more. Let's go ahead and move to the answer key, but you got the speckles. Here we go. So I must have been off on my counting. I apologize for that. The only one that was missing was this garnish here is a bit more darker green. It's missing some light areas there on the left. So yeah, we like to provide this example. It's obviously not an easy spot the difference for many people, but for others that are more detail oriented, it might be easy. It might be even their job to spot these differences. So, you know, people who have higher detail orientation or pattern recognition even might find these differences really easy. And we just like to spot this out as it's a classic example of neurodiversity. This can be a clear value or gift of neurodiversity, being detail oriented. And it should help us to appreciate differences and strengths in people's minds, just as we all have strength in our minds. So yeah, thank you for engaging with that. Just a little fun example to start us off. So question number 1, this was a question that we got. And as I mentioned, please feel free to, you can raise your hand on, or you can put into the chat if you have any follow-up questions or even comments, whether about the question or about some of our answers, please feel free to interact. So this first question here, how do businesses decide which accommodations are reasonable? Is it subjective depending on the business? So I'll actually be taking this first question. And yes, the answer is that the decision on what accommodations are reasonable can vary depending on the business. That being said, businesses are guided by specific principles to ensure fairness and compliance, especially with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So while there can be differences, they have to be guided by these principles. So the steps that a business might take in making their decision begins with an interactive process. When you suggest an accommodation, typically businesses will start this interactive process with you, with the employee, to understand your needs. So the process is about finding a solution, and there might be negotiation within this. You might suggest your accommodation and they might suggest something back, and there has to be this negotiation or compromise in a lot of ways. So that's the first step that they're going to take in finding this reasonable accommodation. Businesses will have to consider the nature of the accommodation. Is it within the essential functions of the job without fundamentally altering the nature of the role or the workplace? Oftentimes, when deciding if it's reasonable, the key part of determining is whether it would cause an undue hardship. This is legal terms, but an undue hardship for the business. So a way that this could be different, smaller companies might be more affected than larger companies by some accommodations. So that could be where it might vary whether an accommodation is accepted or not by a business. For example, a smaller business might find a certain accommodation much too costly or too difficult to implement based on the size of their team, while larger companies may be able to provide some of those more extensive accommodations. It might also come down to cost, the size of the financial resource that the business is able to give, or an impact on the team. So is this accommodation going to maybe completely disrupt operations or affect other employees' roles as well? For example, flexible scheduling may be manageable in some roles, but for others, if it were, say, a customer-facing role where there's specific hours and time demands, then that might not be an accommodation that the business is able to meet. So again, this is where it'll vary business by business. And then ultimately, though, while the decision is subjective in part, it has to be guided by those ADA requirements. And if an accommodation is denied, employers need to have a case for why it is not reasonable. And that's going to be key to getting what you need. They have to provide something back saying, this is the reason why we feel this is an undue hardship. Otherwise, it could be viewed as discrimination according to the ADA guidelines.
And
So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, if I could add to this too, I did want to mention, I know we talked about how some accommodations can be more costly, often when it's like a technology solution or a software that's provided. But I did want to mention that the Department of Rehabilitation in California or in vocational rehabilitation in other states do have funding to enable smaller businesses to provide accommodations. So I just want to mention that there is a resource for businesses for that funding support. And then second, just an example of reasonable accommodations that might give some more insight here as well. And accommodations for neurodiversity in specific oftentimes are not very costly. The biggest cost you might say is that you have a manager who has a willingness and a desire to learn and expand their toolkit as a manager to manage to an individual's mind profile. An example here is a common accommodation that's asked for in interviews is to have the interview questions provided ahead of time. Now, when you see this from a reasonable and a legal standpoint, oftentimes businesses are conflicted because they feel that that would provide an unfair advantage to that candidate. So at that point, the business decides, is it reasonable for us to provide the interview questions to all of the candidates that are going to come into this process? And the way that we frame that is, how often do you go into a meeting for work and not know what we're going to talk about? I'd say more often than not, most jobs, what you're going to go into a meeting to talk about. providing the interview questions in advance is exactly that. You're providing these candidates an ability to perform at their best in the interview by providing those questions in advance. So at this point, the business could decide if it's reasonable to provide them to everybody in advance of the interview. The other option could be what's reasonable is that upon arrival to the interview, all interviewees have a copy of the questions in front of them to have that visual cue to the questions, or type them into the chat of a virtual interview. And that way you're providing that second way of someone seeing that question or information, and that's going to enable them to answer the question well. So just wanted to give an example of how we might look at the reasonableness here and the creative solutions that we can come up with as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And if there's not any follow-up questions to this one, our next question is about accommodations as well. So maybe we'll go on to question 2. And since these are both lumped together as accommodations, we'll take a pause after answering this one, see if anyone in the chat or, joining us here today wants to ask any additional questions about accommodation process. So question number 2, I'll read it here and Jessica will take it away. Where is the line between reasonable accommodations, which we mapped out a little bit there, and changing the core nature of the job or skills needed? At what point does it shift from bending policy to provide tools to help you to succeed to conflicting to the nature of the position or company procedures?
All right, thank you. Yeah, this one is packed. And actually, my last example with the interviews, probably a good example to apply here as well. That line between reasonable accommodations and the core skills of the job can be a little challenging and not straightforward. So some of the considerations that we might keep in mind is the definition. A reasonable accommodation is one that supports a person to perform the essential functions of the job. So first, determining what those essential functions are, and understanding how someone's neurodivergence might be impacting them individually, because we know that you could have one diagnosis and have many different experiences, challenges, limitations, and strengths, which I know Paige is going to answer about soon. So what I would highly recommend is that there isn't a deeper dive into an individual's mind's profile, and Melody from our team is our expert on that. So you can always bring us in to look at that in an individualized way. But what we would suggest is that you first, yes, understand how someone's mind is limited in performing those essential functions of the job, and trying strategies that are going to support them to perform those tasks. So an example here is many people that are neurodivergent might have an auditory processing delay. So this might mean that when they're hearing information, that they have a longer processing pathway before they can provide an answer to it. So when that happens, it can show up in many different ways in a job. But let's say that attending meetings is a part of the essential functions of the job. Attending meetings, interacting with the team, collaborating. If that's the case, somebody with an auditory processing delay might benefit from, or might not only benefit, but need an agenda ahead of time of the meeting. So I know exactly what to prepare for. So as I hear my colleagues talking about a topic, I have already been prepared to contribute to that discussion. You might consider a team note taker. That is reasonable. We're not outing anybody, but we are mindful that someone with an auditory processing delay might not always take notes fast enough of the key points or the key takeaways of that meeting. So could we have a team note taker who types those takeaways or those action items, and it's in a shared document that we all utilize together? One of my colleagues and I, she does not do well at typing while we're in a meeting with other people and people are watching her type notes. I am able to do it very quickly, very efficiently and easy. And so we know that you can ask me, hey, Jess, could you help us take notes in this meeting? I don't feel put on the spot. I'm glad to do it. It actually helps me organize. And so my team knows that they can ask that. But if we just had a team note taker, that could really help us here. And so getting back to the question here then of what we might consider as job carving, because there are core natures of the job. The second thing we see is we've had instances where we've had neurodivergent professionals who are challenged to do certain aspects of their job. So maybe it's a 10-step process. And for one individual who was in an accounting job, where they had to go and find why numbers were not reconciling. Okay, this is very tough to do. You have to think there's thousands of accounts that you're looking at to find the missing numbers. Job carving might look like someone who's very familiar with the accounts can say, all right, we have 1,000 accounts, but for this particular problem, go look at these 20 accounts first. Kind of that thinking of things that are ambiguous is difficult, and having structure is really helpful. So one of his colleagues says, okay, go try these first 20 accounts first. And if you don't see it there, then let me think about it with you to tell you the next 20 accounts. For him, it was too hard, too many to think of the thousands. He just needed someone to help him think of the first 20 that are the most strategic to go after. In this sense, this is a beautiful demonstration of job carving, where this manager said, you know what, I have a colleague who's really good at the investigative piece. Let me shift more of the work to her to do that part. And then he can do more of the actual transactional. Now I can hunt in those 20 accounts. So that's a beautiful way of what a job carving and job shift might look like. And this is kind of an example then of how do you straddle that line. But it does take some creative thinking to it. But many of our businesses are actually very grateful for it because now they're shifting to employees and leveraging their strengths and what they enjoy doing. And it just worked out nicely in this case where the two employees were like, yes, I'd rather do this part of the process more than the other, and they could job share in that sense. So that's where I think at some point you might have to look at that shift of the actual position and job duties.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I do see a question in the chat from Kim. So I want to address it. One of the things I've seen with neurodiverse people is that they sometimes are more emotional and it gets viewed as a behavioral issue. Is there some way to accommodate this? Absolutely. So neurodivergent individuals can sometimes experience heightened emotional responses that could be misunderstood as a behavioral issue rather than just a natural reaction. So accommodations can help support this as part of that emotional control. And even just some quickly that I would suggest that can be helpful for this: flexible breaks, or different workspace options, like providing a quiet workspace, allowing those flexible short breaks for time away to reset, return without feeling overwhelmed or feeling those heightened emotions. Those quiet workspaces can help an individual feel more of in a calm zone to help with manage any emotions as well. Clear communication can really help. So training managers on how to give direct feedback or how to give better constructive feedback so that an employee maybe doesn't respond with a heightened emotion in moments of misunderstanding. Of course, offering any emotional support resources, whether that's counseling or stress management workshops to your team members, or mental health professionals, redirecting the individual to someone that it might come to that point at one point. Also, don't underestimate like the power of consistent routines and clear expectations. When a manager is giving clear expectations, it minimizes that likelihood of unexpected stressors, which might be causing that or the heightened emotional response. So, setting those clear roles, expectations, deadlines allows the individual to feel like it's not a last minute change. So yeah, I would say those are a couple accommodations that could be implemented to help with that. And those are really proactive strategies. I would say reactive strategies is where the manager does need to be trained on, hey, this is likely less of a behavioral issue than maybe just a weakness or challenge within their skill set of executive functions, which emotional control is within those executive functions. And, learning how to address that with the individual and create a supportive environment so that they feel open to share rather than just pointing fingers and saying, hey, this behavior is unacceptable. Let's find a solution together. So I think, the goal is to just lead with curiosity and understand more how you can provide support to that individual. So hopefully that answered your question a bit, Kim.
Melody, yeah, wondering if you want to add here too.
Yeah, wow, you covered, Danielle, so many angles to that, which make a lot of sense. I just wanted to add maybe a little undergirding of understanding, because sometimes when we talk about accommodations, and we have a list that we can just, lean on is supportive, but also understanding why something is coming up can help us be more creative in the moment as we're trying to support someone. So I think what happens for some folks in our community, they might be, as Danielle mentioned, just missing a skill set in that area of emotional regulation under executive functions, but also something that can be really stressful. A lot of our community, or the neurodiverse community, has heightened sensitivities. So the environment that they're in for hours and day upon day is really critical to helping them kind of just be in equilibrium in a peaceful place. So noises and lighting and timing and changes can wear on someone's kind of emotional capacity in a different way than it might wear on some of us who don't have those sensitivities. So on the proactive side, helping some of your hires or your employees think about the environment that's most conducive to their needs can be a really, really helpful way to just avoid those heightened emotional reactions in the end. But the flexibility they become more capable of flexible thinking and reasoning and operating when they have clear expectations, as Danielle mentioned, more structure, more calm. Yeah, so I think you did a good job covering the rest of what was on my mind.
No, thank you, Melody, for providing that context too and background. Awesome. Yeah, we'll go to question 3 here. How do symptoms of neurodivergence or diagnoses look different for people? Why are we seeing more later diagnoses, specifically in women? And yeah, we have Paige here to take on this question.
Thanks, Danielle. This is a great question. And there's so much to this question and the answer. But one of the big things is neurodiversity. Commonly, we talk a lot about autism and ADHD, but there's so much that can be included under neurodiversity. It's basically any cognitive difference, any cognitive condition, anything that might affect someone's brain and how they think, how they behave socially. So it's a lot of things. It can be developmental differences like autism, learning differences like dyslexia, dyscalculia, neurological conditions like if people have had a stroke or Parkinson's, sometimes those can affect similar things. Also, mental health conditions, which are super common at some time during their life. 1 in 2 Americans will have a mental health condition. So basically, half of people are going to be affected by at least half of people are going to be affected by some form of neurodiversity personally and with someone they know too. And then there's what we call neurotypicals, people who are considered or consider themselves to be cognitively normal, maybe, although that's not a great word. But even they're neurotypical people, they will have variations in how they behave, how they think, how they process information. So like with all those different types of brains, everything will look different. All of the strengths and challenges will vary, and just like it would with any person for any reason. So for late diagnosis, especially with women, first of all, I would say there's more awareness and acceptance of neurodiversity and different types of things. And I see a lot of self-advocates on social media. It's become like very well known that autism and ADHD and other conditions can present differently in women. So kind of the word gets around and there's more awareness, so there can be more diagnosis, and sometimes it happens later. Like for me, I was diagnosed as a young adult when I was 21, and my story was like growing up, I did really well in school. I was maybe quiet and quirky, maybe a little awkward, but I just totally blended in socially. But then once the support and the structure of school was gone, it was like I was not mentally or emotionally or developmentally prepared for the adult world and the workforce with all the unspoken social cues and kind of infinite possibilities of what to do in life. So for me, I kind of had more challenges at that point and had some depression, anxiety. And then it was when I was facing those challenges that it came out from psychologists. I saw that, oh, you have autism. And like we probably wouldn't have thought about it. I think there's a lot more awareness now of how it can present differently in girls. And there's a few reasons for that. So historically, the diagnostic criteria of autism and ADHD, it's based on how it presents in men and boys. So it can not always include the way it appears for women. There's not always an awareness with clinicians or the public of how these conditions can present in women. And women can also be misdiagnosed with other conditions, like the question earlier about heightened emotional responses and emotional regulation challenges in people with autism. So oftentimes that can easily be misdiagnosed as it's not seen as autism, it's just seen as, okay, this woman or girl might have a mood disorder or something else and maybe miss the developmental condition. That's not to say both can't exist in the same person. It's actually pretty common for anxiety and other mental health challenges to present along with autism, ADHD, or other forms of neurodivergence, but it's really good that there's more awareness because then people can get treatment for any conditions that they have going on. And ASD and ADHD, which stands for autism and ADHD, those have been underdiagnosed in women because of kind of the stereotypes or the expectations of behavior. Like sometimes women with autism can mask more easily, and which means kind of blend in socially, which was my experience. In fact, and this can cause burnout because it takes a lot of effort to appear neurotypical as much as possible. And from a young age, from like a kid to a teen to a young adult to even I catch myself now, I would like watch TV and movies and pay such close attention to what people are doing socially on the shows and like study it and try to imitate it to get along socially and try to seem the way it seemed that people are supposed to be, which is not always the best role models, but I've heard other women have had that experience too, trying to understand the social norms wherever they can. And the special interests can also be different for women. Like a stereotype sometimes is people with autism might like STEM or technology or video games, and people of any gender can like those things, but sometimes, like, my experience was just naturally enjoying things that were more female stereotyped, like makeup, drama, TV, hair, arts and crafts. Like, I loved all those things. So it was pretty easy to find common interests with people and just blend in. It wouldn't have really raised any flags that I was different. And there can be relationship challenges that come up with autism, and maybe not knowing about the social cues. And then for ADHD, which is a very important one that's becoming more understood for women, like, I saw that adult ADHD diagnoses for women have gone up like so much in the past few years. There's just so much more awareness and understanding. And I think some of the social and vocational changes we experienced with the pandemic kind of brought out differences that people might not have otherwise noticed or really dealt with. So there's inattentive ADHD and hyperactivity in ADHD. Women are more likely to have an inattentive type, which can be less disruptive than the hyperactive symptoms that are usually seen in men and boys. So they can be a misdiagnosis because it presents differently than how they usually think of ADHD. Women with ADHD can also have emotional regulation challenges, which, as with autism or other conditions, it could be mistaken for simply a mood disorder and missing the developmental disorder component. And then women with ADHD can also mask their symptoms, like women with autism mask their symptoms. So overcompensating and putting in a real conscious effort to blend in and do what they need to do, like work on coping mechanisms, and that can delay diagnosis and lead to burnout, because it takes so much effort to live in a world that's designed for neurotypicals. Yeah, so that's what I had for that answer. And I see we've got some other comments and questions in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I know Suzanne had this initial question here in the chat. And yeah, Jessica's gonna address it a little bit, but can you recommend a quiz or questionnaire that an individual could use to learn if they are neurodivergent, or managers or HR could use to learn what neurodivergent thinking or behaving looks like as an employee? And I think you clarified, Suzanne, that it's more so along the lines of raising awareness of how behaviors could present in different situations so that managers can offer that support and employees, feel comfortable asking for those accommodations. And yeah, Jessica, if you want to take that.
Yeah, thanks. And Melody, if you have any insight on some good resources here. But yeah, the trainings that we do, I hope, as we hear from our companies, help with some of that latter part of your question of what does neurodivergent thinking, behaving look like in the workplace. And one of our trainings is called Understanding All Minds. And it's really actually just understanding these different dimensions of our minds, like some of us being more detail-oriented versus holistic in thinking. That when your manager asks you, okay, we're going to go and build an airplane, or tells the team, we're going to go build an airplane. Does someone's mind go more to the details, like the specs of how, like what parts are we going to need? Or are you more of a holistic thinker of, well, what is the airplane for? Where's the budget for this coming from? Things like that. So different domains of our minds, different processing styles, what goes into social fluency and those emotional regulation that someone had brought up earlier. And so that's what we recommend, is training so that you could start to notice some of these differences, not just in neurodivergent colleagues, but in all of us. And what we love is that managers say, oh my gosh, this helps me with my family. This helps me with all partners in life. And understanding that all of our minds just have different ways of approaching things. And some of it's developmental. So hopefully that helps to answer. In terms of a quiz, I see other answers here. Yes, diagnosis is required from a professional who can actually perform the full diagnostic to give a diagnosis. We do know that it's very costly. And so we do recommend, like, especially for parents, to do it at a younger age when there's government services that could cover that cost. But for adults, it is much pricier. Melody, curious if there are any go-to resources that you think are helpful to look at for, if someone's not able to get a diagnosis yet.
Yeah, so I mean, a neuropsychologist is going to be your best bet in terms of getting a full picture of how your mind is working. I want to go get one myself because I see the ways that I show up in the workplace that are maybe a little bit different from some of my colleagues. So in order for there to be a specific diagnosis, you need that professional. But I would say looking into executive functioning is one of the best ways to kind of understand your own mind and the minds of those around you. There are, Peg Dawson has a brilliant one. She's the author of Smart But Scattered, which is just a book that talks a lot about attention and executive functioning. So I would say, though, for a manager, the best way to identify if there's potential neurodivergence going on, and it can be with any of your employees, because we all just have little spots of differences for each other that we might notice about each other. But for a manager, I would say anytime you see something in communication that you expect to kind of get through and it's not getting through, I would say, to start to consider the way that this person or myself, the way that I'm offering information might not be aligned to the way the person I'm speaking to or presenting to likes to internalize information. So information processing and communication should be a pretty easy way to kind of highlight if you are thinking about things differently. And and you can also just audition some support to see what works. If you find that you are communicating with a person in the same way over and over, if you're verbalizing instructions and those instructions continue to be misinterpreted or details are being forgotten or falling through the cracks, then I would suggest a different form of presenting that information. Make it more visual, make it more hands-on. So you'll start to kind of collect clues. Hey, Melody really needs to hear things. Visual cues do not help Melody track what I'm saying, but I've noticed that when I verbally express myself to her, she hears all the details the first time. So that might help you just clue in to it. And again, this is any of us as thinkers. No one needs to have a diagnosis to be able to benefit from, visual presentation versus auditory or information presented auditorily. Thank you, Jessica. In the notes, she has posted that resource from Peg, and I will consider the other resources around, and we can perhaps shoot off an email that might be helpful as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melody. Yeah, let's go on to our next question here. Question number 4. One of my employees is brilliant at the technical skills of their job, but sometimes creates tension amongst the team and often doesn't socialize with team members to improve relationships. What would be your advice to get the employee more involved and to improve team building? Yeah, so in a situation like this, I would say first that maybe some neurodiversity education for a team and for managers could help. Because as I mentioned before with the emotional control question, sometimes we assign meaning or judgment to social behaviors that we might observe, but the individual might not have the intent of causing this conflict or even the intent of seeming non-social, like in this specific example. And, we actually got asked this from a company last week, but they had an employee being rude to the team during meetings. So of course, initially we start asking deeper, well, what does that mean, being rude? And it meant that the employee was making blunt comments. So now we have more of the facts behind the situation, not just the perception, and we can actually address it. We can address it with the employee instead of just pointing the finger and saying you're being rude. We can say, hey, you know, we've observed that you've been making some very honest, blunt comments to team members. And then we start that opportunity for perspective shifting. You know, how would you feel if this was said? Or did you realize that this was causing conflict on the team? And then finding maybe either a better time to make those comments or making those comments more appropriate so that they don't cause conflict. So, you know, I saw that aspect of the question. I also see there's more of an issue of improving relationships here. So this could be an opportunity to coach the managers and kind of ask, how do you want this individual to be socializing? Like, what are the social situations that they need to join in order to be fulfilling their job role more fully or improving that team relationship? Because these could just be some unwritten social rules or norms that need to be explained to the employee first, and then the situation's rectified. And just to provide another example too, that we've had is one of our talents was eating lunch at his desk instead of in the break room where the team generally ate together. So the manager didn't really like this and wanted the team to socialize more and build relationships at lunch. And, you know, our talent just didn't know that. So there was a written rule there that, oh, the team eats together. So that, you know, has to be shared first. And then has to be seen whether they're comfortable doing that, because in this circumstance, that wasn't necessarily a job function. This is more so an unwritten rule that's the manager would prefer them to do. So, you know, there might need to be a compromise, like eating lunch on his own, but then joining in the last 10 minutes, or maybe they're open to joining lunch now that they know this rule. So I think that there just needs to be really clear communication about what's expected. And then I would say lastly, to improve relationships among the team, the manager should always take the initiative in carving out those social hours or any structured team building exercises so that that individual is then prompted to get involved instead of just, you know, being expected to design their own opportunities for social relationships on the team. So yeah, that would just be some of my advice for more team building and avoiding conflict. But if anyone wants to jump in too.
I think there's also a very real consideration that needs to be made with some of the neurodivergent community, which is that there are appropriate level. I think the question that we always need to ask ourselves, especially as managers, but also just colleagues, where is the line between when do I expect more from this person and when do I just radically accept what this person may or may not be capable of? So as clear communication, as Danielle mentioned, I think can go a long way to bridge a gap, but there's also a reality that exists. Sometimes we're working with people that just, it's more of a can't instead of a won't. A person might really want to participate in a way that is seen as the norm around the office, but sometimes there's a can't there. You know, a lot of our community experiences a completely different level of social anxiety, one that might not make sense when you have not experienced that. So the kind of pressure that neurodivergent individuals are under is a completely different type of pressure. It can be a heavy load. So I think going to our employees whenever there is some expectation that we feel needs to be met, asking that question, as Danielle said, is this an essential part of the job function, or do I need to just be able to accept that this is a difference and differences are okay? Do I need this person to show up in this way all of the time? Am I asking them to do something they can't do? Or is there something I can do to bridge the gap, to compromise in some way? I had an example come to mind where even I was working with the family actually around a neurodivergent individual. And this young man is very capable, has his master's, works on these crazy coding and technological feats that I cannot even imagine. But even at home with his mother and his sister, his communication is limited to there's a notebook that they leave on the counter and they ask questions and he writes back and forth, or sometimes even just to acknowledge that a statement was made rather than conjuring the energy necessary to have a written response. He will just mark it with a dot. Yeah, mom, I saw this. And that is enough effort because of everything else around him that's drawing on him. So I think to really consider that difference in effort that is necessary for some neurodivergent folks can really help you be able to shift your expectation rather than enforce your expectation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melody. I know we're wrapping up here. We only have about 4 minutes left, but I want to leave some more time in case anyone has any additional questions, whether they want to share them over audio or drop them in the chat. Yeah, this would be the time. And I did get a question about the recording for this. We are recording it for our own purposes, but we can also provide a link for the individuals that were here today if they'd like to view it. So yeah, we can send that out. But I'll pause for questions.
And thank you all again for being here with us today. It means a lot to know there are others who appreciate and enjoy engaging in conversation with us about these very real questions. And we are thinking of hosting another one. So if more questions come to mind, we always are here to answer. And more often than not, your question is one that other people have. So it'll really increase the learning for our whole community. So yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them here, or you can email us separately as well.
Absolutely, yes. And I'll put my email in the chat also. Anyone wants to reach out. Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you,
Thomas.
Tom.
We hope to host more. We definitely have more questions to address. So
Yeah, we have more than we could answer today. So we'll have to do another one.
Absolutely. I know we have a couple minutes here. I don't see any questions, but let's go to question 6 and maybe I can address that really quickly to wrap up our time. I promise to have it done by 1. But I think this can be an important one to address. What if my accommodations make me seem less capable to my coworkers or manager? How can I handle the fear that I'm not pulling my weight? I kind of wanted to highlight this one because I think it's an opportunity to understand that maybe other people might be feeling the same way as you. It's very natural to worry that an accommodation might impact another person's perceptions of you. But I just want to say, remember that needing support doesn't reflect your skills or your value. And that we all need workplace strategies, or we all need strategies in life to help us. One example that we really like to provide too is eyeglasses. A lot of individuals need eyeglasses, and this is just an accommodation that they use to help them do their best work, to help them get through the day. So accommodations really can be viewed in the same way, that it just reduces specific barriers and allows your strengths to shine. So I would just say, focus on your achievements and how your work is benefiting the team, how you're providing value to your team, and kind of normalize that. with your manager and team as well, so that they can understand better. And just frame those, remind yourself, that these accommodations are tools to help you meet and exceed expectations in the workplace. So just wanted to leave with that on an encouraging note too.
Yeah, and the last thing, sorry, Daniel, to add to that is we realize that describing how your mind works is not an easy thing to do. And so we are here as a resource to help you put language to that, plain language that anybody could understand, that this is how my mind works and this is what will really support me to do my best work, just like a pair of glasses allows someone to see better. And so just want to point that out too, that we are here with you and for you. So yeah, you're not alone.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today. Yeah, we'll stick around for a little bit here, and yeah, watch out for our follow-up email with the link to the recording. And we hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.